The sound reached me before the sight did. Groceries hitting concrete. A sharp gasp, then silence heavy enough to make my chest tighten. I moved to the kitchen window, still holding the skillet I'd meant to surprise Sarah with. And that's when I saw it. A uniform that didn't belong. A badge that didn't glint right. And a handprint blooming red across my wife's cheek. Sarah staggered, one palm on the hood of the car, the other clutching a grocery bag that burst open, scattering apples across the driveway. The man responsible, thick-necked, jittery, reeking of false authority, adjusted the crooked badge pinned to his chest like it meant something. He grinned, stepping on a carton of eggs until the yolk bled across the hot Texas asphalt. "Next time, lady, follow the rules," he said, loud enough for me to hear through the glass. Rules. I'd spent 15 years of my life in places where rules were the difference between making it home and becoming a folded flag on someone's mantle. Now I was staring at a stranger, someone who thought a borrowed uniform made him king, laying hands on the one person I swore to protect above all else. My name is Commander Jake Steele, Navy SEAL, recently turned reservist. The kind of man who can dismantle an armed threat in under 10 seconds. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about combat manuals or tactical options. I was thinking about Sarah. She's the opposite of me in almost every way. A pediatric nurse who believes people can be reasoned with, even when they don't deserve it. She's the one who keeps me grounded, who makes sure our kids, Emma, 12, and Marcus, 9, grow up with kindness instead of the sharp edges the world carved into me. We bought this house 6 months ago, hoping for normal. Hoping for Friday night barbecues, kids riding bikes until the streetlights came on, neighbors who waved just because. And for a while it worked. The Chin family next door welcomed us with dumplings and laughter that smelled like sesame and ginger. The Rodriguezes down the block hosted Sunday cookouts where mesquite smoke hung in the air like a blessing. Oakwood Estates looked like a postcard version of the American dream. Until we met her. Brenda Hartwell, HOA president, real estate shark, and self-appointed dictator of every mailbox and blade of grass in the neighborhood. A woman who wore entitlement like perfume and believed the word community meant whatever Brenda wants. And trailing in her shadow, the man outside right now, Derek, her nephew. Failed cop, wannabe enforcer, hired muscle in a bargain bin uniform. That slap wasn't about groceries. It wasn't about Sarah. It was about control. And Brenda had just unleashed a thug who didn't realize the family he was targeting wasn't built to break. As I set the skillet down, the SEAL in me surged forward, calculating outcomes, scanning angles, measuring distance to target. He thought he was enforcing rules. He was about to learn what happens when you make war on the wrong family. The silence after the slap lingered long after Derek's pickup rattled out of our driveway. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, groceries abandoned, her cheeks swollen with the outline of a man's arrogance. She tried to brush it off, nurse instincts, always minimizing her own pain to focus on others, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "Jake, it's fine," she whispered, voice too calm. "The board will listen. Brenda just doesn't understand." I cut her off with a look. I'd spent too many years reading the faces of men under fire not to recognize fear when it crept in around the edges. Sarah wasn't fine. Our children weren't fine. And pretending diplomacy would tame a bully was the kind of optimism that got people hurt. But she believed in process and fairness. That's who she was. And I loved her for it. The first red flag had come weeks earlier, before the slap, when a notice appeared on our mailbox like a scarlet letter. Violation. Unapproved display of holiday decoration. The holiday in question? Independence Day. The decoration? An American flag no bigger than a pillowcase. I'd laughed at first, assuming it was a clerical error. But Sarah called Brenda, hoping for reason. She got a lecture instead. Military families sometimes struggle adapting to civilian expectations, Brenda had said, her voice like syrup poured over poison. This is a community, not a barracks. I swallowed my anger then, took the flag down. Promised Sarah we'd fight with paperwork, not fists. But paperwork only emboldened Brenda. And then came Derek. Derek wasn't hired security. He was a weapon. A failed police recruit with a surplus badge and a chip on his shoulder, deployed like a scarecrow in uniform. He drove slow circles through the neighborhood in his white truck, magnetic decals peeling at the edges, spitting tobacco into bottles, and calling it authority. Every rule was an excuse. Want an inch too high? Fine. Bike on the porch? Fine. Park in your own driveway with veteran plates? Fine. Neighbors grumbled, but paid up, too polite or too weary to fight. Mrs. Chun stopped hanging her lanterns. The Rodriguezes canceled their daughter's quinceañera after Derek cited them for noise potential. Each small surrender fed Brenda's empire, until fear became part of the air. Sarah still believed she could reason with them. I admired her courage, even as I knew it was like throwing water on a grease fire. She saw the best in people. I'd spent a career preparing for the worst. Now, standing in our kitchen with her cheek turning purple, the line had been crossed. Derek had turned his harassment physical. And Brenda? She was smiling somewhere, convinced she'd put us in our place. I looked at my wife, then at the window where Derek's boot prints still marked our driveway. This wasn't just about a flag anymore. This was about a war for our family's safety, and I'd already begun planning my first move. The bruise on Sarah's face should have been the breaking point. But in Oakwood Estates, it was only the beginning. 2 days after the slap, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, just Brenda's sharp handwriting. Emergency board meeting. Tuesday, 2 p.m. I was scheduled for base training, which meant Sarah would have to walk into the lion's den alone. She didn't flinch. "I'll go," she said, icing her cheek as if it were nothing more than a playground scrape. I wanted to stop her. Every instinct screamed it was a trap. But Sarah's strength has always been different from mine. Where I see a battlefield, she sees a chance to stand her ground with grace. The meeting took place in the community center, fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. Brenda sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyalists, faces tight with the smug certainty of people who believed they'd already won. Sarah presented her case calmly. Derek had no license. The citations were baseless. The slap was an assault. She asked for documentation, oversight, accountability, nothing unreasonable. The response? Brenda smiled that thin, venomous smile. "The board has voted to expand Derek's authority," she announced, tapping her manicure against the table like a gavel. "From now on, he may issue immediate citations for any visible violation. No documentation required." The vote passed 3-1. Sarah's dissent landed like a stone in the ocean, swallowed and ignored. By the time I got her call, she was shaking, not from fear but from outrage. "They changed the rules while I was standing there," she said, voice raw. "They gave him more power, Jake." That night, Derek celebrated his promotion the only way he knew how, by turning our home into a target range. A garden hose visible from the street? Fine. The kids' bikes leaning against the porch? Fine. A welcome mat half an inch off center? Fine. By sundown, the total stacked up to nearly $500. It wasn't just us. Mrs. Chun found a citation on her door for foreign decorations. The Rodriguezes were fined for food odors. Even Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old widow, received a notice for unsafe fence height after Derek wandered into her backyard at midnight. Fear spread like wildfire, and for the first time, Sarah's optimism faltered. "What if they never stop?" she whispered that night, lying beside me, staring at the ceiling. "What if this is how it's going to be?" I stared into the dark, every nerve in my body alive with the same tension I'd felt before missions overseas. Only this wasn't Fallujah or Kandahar. This was home, and the enemy wasn't carrying rifles. It was carrying clipboards and fake badges. That was the twist I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about us anymore. Brenda and Derek weren't running an HOA. They were running a dictatorship, and our neighbors were too afraid to fight back. If Sarah's bruised cheek lit the fire in me, that night poured gasoline on it. They wanted obedience. What they were about to get was resistance. I used to think battles had clear front lines. But in Oakwood Estates, the war crept into every corner of our lives, quietly, persistently, like mold spreading behind a wall. It started with Derek's truck. Every evening at 6, his white pickup rolled past our house, engine idling, magnetic decals glinting under the streetlight. He'd park across from our kitchen window, cigarette smoke drifting into the air, eyes fixed on Sarah as she set dinner on the table. Emma asked why the mean man was watching us eat. Marcus wanted to know if we'd done something wrong. I told him no. But inside, I was swallowing rage so sharp it tasted like metal. Sarah tried to ignore him. That was her way. Smile at patients in pain, hold their hands, give them comfort even as exhaustion threatened to break her. And I meant it. At least, part of me did. I set up cameras, motion-activated, infrared, covering every inch of our property. Legal in Texas. Every drive-by, every trespass, every glare through our window recorded in high definition. If Derek wanted to play cop, I would make sure the real authorities had a case they couldn't ignore. But building a case didn't ease the knot in my chest when I saw Sarah jump at the sound of tires on gravel. It didn't stop my fist from clenching every time Derek's truck slowed near our house. And it sure as hell didn't silence the part of me that wanted to drag him out of that cab and end this the way I'd been trained to. Instead, I buried myself in research, property codes, HOA bylaws, state security regulations. What I found made my blood run cold. Derek had no license, no insurance, no legal standing. Every fine he issued was as fake as the badge pinned to his chest. And Brenda? She'd been funneling community funds to pay him under the table. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was corruption, fraud, a criminal enterprise hiding behind manicured lawns. The question wasn't if I'd strike back. The question was how far I'd have to go. The night it broke open was supposed to be ordinary. Sarah was working a late shift at the hospital. Emma and Marcus were at the table, finishing homework. I was in the garage, reviewing hours of security footage, the hum of the monitor filling the silence. Then headlights cut across the driveway. Derek's truck. He didn't idle this time. He pulled in. Tires grinding gravel. Engine off. I felt in my gut the shift from harassment to danger. I stepped outside before he reached the door. Moonlight caught the shine of his fake badge, the puffed chest, the swagger of a man who thought fear made him powerful. "Evening, Commander," he sneered, voice slurred from whatever bottle he'd emptied before showing up. "Need to check your vehicle for contraband. HOA business." Behind me, the curtains stirred, Emma peeking out. Marcus, too. My children, watching their father face down a man who had terrorized them. I lowered my voice, calm but edged with steel. "You've got 10 seconds to leave this property." Derek smirked. "Or what? You'll hit me? Can't do that, soldier boy. Neighbors already think you've got combat PTSD. One punch and I call the cops. Guess who they'll believe? The HOA officer or the Navy hothead?" He didn't know I'd already filed complaints with the sheriff. He didn't know Sarah had documented every bruise, every trespass, every fine. He didn't know I had 3 months of high-definition footage of him stalking families, harassing children, prowling through yards like a predator. But he was about to find out. Because this wasn't just me standing there. This was every neighbor he'd threatened. Every immigrant family he'd fined for foreign decorations. Every widow he'd woken at midnight with clipboard in hand. Every kid he'd scared into silence. "Step back," I said, voice steady. "You are not law enforcement. You are not security. You are a criminal trespassing on private property." And then the lights came on. Not mine, my neighbor's. Mrs. Chen's porch, the Rodriguez's front door, even old Mrs. Patterson with her cane. One by one, houses lit up, doors opening, people spilling into the street with phones raised high. The sound of sirens followed. Sheriff's deputies pulled in, floodlights washing Derek in white. He blinked, confused, like a man who just realized the audience wasn't laughing at his joke, but waiting for his fall. I stepped aside as the officers surrounded him. "Hands where we can see them, sir." He shouted about authority, about protecting property values, about military families being dangerous. None of it mattered. The handcuffs clicked shut. Then Brenda arrived, storming out in silk pajamas, shrieking about conspiracies. Before she could finish, one of the deputies handed her the warrant. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Every secret she thought buried laid bare in black ink. Sarah came home minutes later, rushing from the car, still in scrubs, eyes wide. I pulled her close, let her see the cuffs on Derek, the warrant in Brenda's trembling hands, The neighbors united under the glow of porch lights. For the first time in months, I felt the air shift. Fear was gone. The fight was over. The next morning, Oakwood Estates didn't look the same. The lawns were still trimmed, the mailboxes still polished, the sprinklers still clicked on at dawn, but something invisible had shifted. Fear had drained away, and in its place, there was breath. Sarah walked outside with coffee in hand, hair loose, bruise faded to a pale shadow. Emma and Marcus played on the driveway, laughter spilling into the street without glances over their shoulders. For the first time in months, our home felt like a home again. The sheriff's office confirmed what I already knew. Derek's record was longer than his truck bed. Assault, stalking, impersonating an officer. The probation he'd been skating on snapped shut around him like a steel trap. Brenda's arrest was the bigger shock. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Years of skimming dues and funneling money into her lifestyle had left a paper trail even she couldn't shred. Neighbors who had once stayed quiet started talking. Mrs. Chun told us Derek demanded she strip the red lanterns that had hung at her doorway for decades. The Rodriguezes admitted they'd been fined for mariachi music. Even Mrs. Patterson, with her trembling hands, described the night Derek stood in her backyard with a flashlight, insisting her fence was too high for regulation. Every story was another thread in a tapestry of intimidation. But here's the thing about bullies: they depend on silence. Once one person speaks, others find their voice. And once voices gather, silence becomes impossible. Sarah became the center of that movement. She didn't ask for it, but neighbors looked to her because she'd walked into the board meeting alone, because she'd stood calm where others bent. Within weeks, the community voted her interim president of the HOA. Her first act? Dismantling Derek's so-called security contract and refunding every illegitimate fine. Her second? Rewriting bylaws with one rule carved in stone. No one in this neighborhood would ever be above accountability again. As for me, I stood back and watched my wife transform. I'd fought battles across the globe, but she fought the one here at home with grace sharper than any weapon I'd carried. Our children didn't see a victim when they looked at her. They saw a leader. 6 months later, Oakwood Estates held its first community festival. Banners fluttered, grills smoked, kids ran across lawns that once carried the weight of fear. I raised our flag again in the yard, the same flag Brenda had once fined us for, and this time it didn't hang alone. All down the street, flags waved, stitched in different colors, telling different stories, but bound by the same wind. Standing there, I realized something. Justice isn't loud. It isn't a single dramatic night with sirens and handcuffs. Justice is the sound of children laughing where they once whispered. It's neighbors gathering instead of hiding. It's the quiet strength of a woman who refused to bend. Brenda and Derek thought they could rule through intimidation. What they built was fear. What Sarah built was community. And as I watched Emma chase Marcus across the lawn, her laughter carrying in the evening light, I knew the truth that Brenda never understood. Power doesn't live in titles or fake badges. It lives in the people who refuse to be broken.